I think we've all heard the advice that we should be using stories in our marketing, yet where most people kind of stop that conversation is just simply telling you, tell stories. Tell a story about this, tell a story about that. And let me take a quick moment here to reveal what I found to be one of the most critical elements of a story. And if you're not yet using this aspect of storytelling, you end up actually alienating your audience, and that unfortunately means you might end up actually costing yourself the sale. The best way to tell the story of this, a story to explain storytelling, right? The best way to illustrate this was that there was a convention that I was speaking at, and the setup of this event was they kept all the attendees in their own set rooms. There were like 3 different rooms, and then they rotated the speakers, which because of that, it meant I got to hear some of the other speakers present what their talks were several times over. There was this one woman, and she had this incredible story about how she overcame emotional trauma as she let go of everything that had been holding her back. So many things in her life began to open up, and it wasn't just that her health turned around, it was that was the moment where her business officially then took off. And again, I had to hear her tell the story several times, and I gotta tell you, it was just pissing me off that I'm watching as everybody is in the audience, listening to her tell this incredible story. And I mean, they're playing on their phones, they're looking at their watches, they're flipping through the convention catalog. Unfortunately, her audience was completely ignoring her story. And because we had a quick moment in between the next round of presentations, I made one specific suggestion to her. I gave her the writing of one simple transition, and when she did it the next time, there wasn't anybody playing on their phones, there wasn't anyone looking at their watches, and it wasn't just the fact that everybody was now finally paying attention to her. She had a line of people ready to sign up for her program right after the presentation. Do you know that moment where you can look at something that you've done and realize you can't go back to the old way? And the funny thing is, I actually just used part of this influential storytelling strategy on you just now. Did you catch it? It's that moment to break away from the story, and then from a theatrical metaphor, break the fourth wall and speak directly to your audience. You could have the most incredible story in the world. You could have gone through things that people couldn't even imagine, or some people shouldn't even have to deal with. Yet if that story is not breaking that fourth wall and creating an alignment between you and your ideal audience, unfortunately, that means that you're training your audience to ignore your message and find something else to distract themselves away. One of the better ways to look at storytelling when it comes to our marketing online, or even in person, would be to look at how the story can illustrate a specific point. If you're just telling the story because this story gets a good laugh, there might be something to that, yet it may not be serving you in your business as well as you think. If you're only telling this other specific story because it makes you look really smart and has people now looking up to you, chances are you're completely missing the point as to the value of a story. So take a moment and ask yourself, what are the possible fears? What are the possible misperceptions? What are the blocks? What are the common objections that people would have if they were encountering your product or your service? And start to ask yourself, what stories do I have that I've been through, that I've experienced, that help to illustrate the real answer to that concern? Lock this message into your mind. Telling does not always equal selling. If you are just simply bashing people over the head, metaphorically, with what you're trying to prove to them, unfortunately, that often means it's going in one ear and out the other. Instead, telling does not always equal selling, and stories allow you to bring people into an experience, and by doing so, let them now begin to put themselves in that story and indeed sell themselves inside of what you do. So here's a quick exercise to begin to make your stories even more influential when it's time to now sell your products, to sell your services. Run a bit of an analysis as to all the stories that you have. Basically, compile your greatest hits of yourself. Then look at those stories and ask yourself, what does this story prove? What does this story illustrate? And I'm telling you, the more you do this, the more you're going to begin to realize that you can often use different stories for different purposes. Something about storytelling that may surprise many of you is you can actually use the same story to prove different points. You might be able to use this story to illustrate that specific idea, or you could use the story again to a completely different audience to illustrate a completely different point. Rather than look at the crowd and think, what do I need to tell them? What is the influential journey that I can now take you on, where you in the audience are having the epiphanies, you are making the discoveries, You are creating these new understandings, and I'm simply the guide helping you to do that. If you can do that in your marketing, this is how you create that pre-sold client. That person who is already sold completely on what you do, and they're already rehearsing saying yes to you even before you ask for the sale. So as you begin to really collect your stories and ask yourself, what do these stories illustrate? What do these stories prove? Go back to this idea of, theatrically speaking, breaking that fourth wall. And what is that moment in your marketing where you can actually step outside of a story and directly address the people that are watching you? And your easiest way to do this is either one of two mechanisms. Option number one, you could ask a question. You can go for that rhetorical question that invites your audience to now look inside and find meaning inside of your story, where now the story is no longer just about you. The story isn't just about you telling the experience as to something that you've been through. Instead, the story aligns directly to your audience. And I'll tell you, my favorite part of this is that your story doesn't have to be the linear, exact story of your crowd. I can think back to someone who had a major epiphany as I was sharing this with him in his business. He works with people in his consulting business who have an extremely specific medical condition. And the way that he got interested in the style of coaching that he does was that he went to a Barnes & Noble bookstore, and he's going inside and he's thinking he wants to learn this specific method of change, and he's expecting that there's just going to be one book on the topic. You can imagine his surprise where he walks in, and there on the bookshelf of this bookstore are like 24 books with nearly identical titles, all about the same subject. And out of frustration, he just bought like 4 or 5 of these books. He's now at home, he's reading these books, and it feels like he has an answer. It feels like he's learning something, but he has no clue how to put it all together. Do you know that feeling where it seems as if you're on this quest to find exactly what you need, and whenever it feels like you're getting really close, you realize you're further away than you even imagined? And as he read the books, suddenly it clicked that he was overcomplicating the journey. He broke everything down, and as he read all of the books, something finally clicked. He saw the way that all of these different books were addressing different styles of the same change process. And really, it was his responsibility to put everything together in a unique sequence, and by doing so, he created a market of his own. He became the industry leader of that specific method. Now, let me take a step off to the side and kind of detail exactly what just happened there. He was talking to an audience that specifically had this one medical diagnosis, and the thing you need to know is that it's not like this, do this blood test, you have this condition. No. Instead, his people would be going to doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist, and only eventually would they finally diagnose this very specific medical condition. Where he was getting stuck was the fact that he did not have this specific medical condition. Now, he had family members who had it, and that's how he became aware of how big of a problem that it was. Yet he was holding himself back in his marketing because he was telling himself the story that because I haven't lived through this, I can't talk to that crowd. Do you know that situation where like you're in your head convincing yourself that something is more complicated than it needs to be, and instead you realize you've had the answer in front of you the entire time? Now, some of you might be smiling because you just realized I did it again. I stepped outside of the story and I asked a question directly to you. Do you know that situation where you're on this quest to find something, and the more you look, the more you realize you're further away? Or let's go inside of his specific story where all the answers are in front of you, and yet it's as if you've got a blindfold on and you can't see it directly in front. So one mechanism of breaking this fourth wall is to simply ask a question. Go rhetorical and invite your audience to then connect directly to you. Take note, his story was about finding a book. Their story was about getting a specific diagnosis. At the core of both of these stories was a journey to get closer and closer to a specific solution. It was completely okay that he did not have the exact same backstory that they did. However, part of his story directly aligned to theirs. Another mechanism is to make a bold statement. And let me keep this brief for teaching purposes here. The bold statement can be something completely congruent to the story, to the situation your audience is running into. Notice how, if I do this properly, simply giving you this bold statement has you kind of metaphorically wanting to lean in more and find out more about what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's just that one food that completely makes weight loss surprisingly easy. It turns out that most people are paying way too much money in their taxes, and they're giving the government an unnecessary raise. And yes, there's something beautifully clickbait-ish about this, yet the fact is, you click on those articles too, you read because you want to find out even more. Find out which child star is now an adult and is now drop-dead gorgeous. Try and deny it. You've clicked on those articles before too, right? So you see, it's not just about telling you to tell stories. It's about going inside the structure of the story and through the right belief-shifting persuasion principles, looking for the places to create alignment directly to your audience and looking for the right ways to connect this story directly to your crowd. And by doing so, knock down objections even before people can think of them. Now, I have to tell you that the structure of a story is just one part of a larger system of creating the right belief-shifting persuasion to have your ideal audience selling themselves into what you do even before you ask for the sale. If you want more like this, head over to attractpresoldclients.com. That's where you can check out our podcast with free episodes every single week, or we offer something called a client attraction audit. This is where you can connect with me or somebody on my team to help you to diagnose exactly what's missing inside of your marketing right now, to look at the right persuasive principles that can easily and naturally fold themselves inside of what you do to have your audience saying yes even before you ask for the sale. To find out more, head over to attractpresoldclients.com.